One of the most reliable leads for thwarting Deoxys S was another variant of Deoxys S, especially the Scarf variant, showing DOS's ability to adapt. Choice Scarf Deoxys speed might sound like a joke, but it wasn't used for outrunning a Groudon that had Rock Polish twice or something silly like that. With the Scarf, it would outrun opposing DOS and would thus be able to successfully use Trick before it got taunted. This would completely ruin the opposing DOS. It would be forced to switch out without having laid down hazards, while the formerly Scarf DOS could switch to a self-rocking teammate like Groudon and gain the hazard advantage. Plus, when the newly Scarf DOS came back in, it wouldn't be able to switch moves, meaning it would only be able to get up rocks or spikes. If the opposing DOS used Stealth Rock as the Scarf DOS used Trick, as it sometimes did in Fear of Trick once Scarf DOS became more popular, then that was fine too. The opposing DOS would be forced to switch out only having gotten rocks, and the formerly Scarf DOS could begin using spikes itself. It'd get 2 layers before switching out if the opponent's response was Giratina Origin or Scizor and thus pack priority. But otherwise, it was probably getting all 3 spikes down thanks to its huge Scarf for outrunning speed and the focus sash it had taken from the opposing Deoxys S. Trick Scarf DOS was an excellent set, another testament to DOS's nearly boundless versatility and featured on many of the most successful teams in the metagame. DOS adapted in many different ways besides just its Scarf set. Choice Scarf Darkrai was considered the only true method of actually preventing DOS from setting up on the first turn at all, thanks to its huge speed and Dark Void. But eventually DOS started running Lumberry to shrug off the Dark Void, and it got up rocks as planned. It made up for the lack of a focus sash by investing EVs in special defense, which allowed it to take both Scarf Darkrai's Dark Pulse and Sash Rayquaza's Dracometer. Another popular anti-DOS lead was Tyranitar, whose Sandstorm would finish DOS off after Tyranitar's Crunch brought it to its Sash. But once again, DOS adapted, this time by weakening Crunch through Cobra Berry. This allowed DOS to either get up both rocks and spikes, or to get rocks and then bring T-Tar down to 1 HP with Superpower, depending on its team. If the T-Tar was a Lum variant instead of Sash, DOS would even KO it, turning the tables completely. Cobra was also helpful in giving the DOS user extra play in numerous situations against Darkrai. Some players denied DOS's hazards by leading off with a Rapid Spin user that could force taunts by threatening its own hazards, wear DOS down, and spam Rapid Spin to prevent DOS from keeping hazards up. At first it was Fortress, then Tentacruel rose in popularity. A few players even used Armaldo, which was gimmicky, but such was the power of DOS, sending players plundering the depths of NU in desperate search for an answer. These Pokemon could potentially be irritating, but DOS could still deal with them. It could choose a coverage move for surprise KOs, either Hidden Power Firing Fortress or Psycho Boosting Tentacruel. It didn't even need to do this though. It could still play around them just with its standard set. It could switch to a teammate, force these Pokemon out, then double switch back in and get its rocks up uncontested, allowing Giratina Origin to have a hazard to spin block, rinse and repeat with spikes. Even though DOS was meant to play in an immediate rapid fire fashion, it would play with a more methodical approach as well. It could really just do whatever it wanted in the lead slot, including relegating Stealth Rock elsewhere and focusing solely on stacking as many layers of spikes as possible, even on non-Scarf sets. In addition to making its team more efficient in getting up hazards, this allowed it another coverage move, further improving its matchup spread. DOS wasn't much of a non-lead, as it wasn't at all as threatening an offensive Pokemon. Some players utilize a lead set outside the lead slot in order to more effectively get hazards up. It was more easily able to do this because it wouldn't be facing a Pokemon specialized to beat it, giving it an edge, and was able to switch in easily despite its lack of defensive utility by pairing with Scarf Darkrai, who would easily sleep the opposing lead. Though the strategy was effective, it was quite specific and thus wasn't too common. However, just like Azelf and OU, there was nothing wrong with being the best lead around. Sure, DOS could backfire if played mindlessly, but if its user utilized it well by taking into consideration its moveset and various lead matchups in conjunction with its teammates, the sky was the limit. By being the tier's single most defining lead, which the entire metagame revolved around, Deoxys Speed was one of the most important Pokemon in Generation 4 Ubers. And as a whole, the 4th generation was another successful one for the Deoxys forms. It can best be summarized by the Ubers lead metagame often being a Deoxys war in one form or another. The first stage of Generation 5 OU involved testing a bunch of former Ubers. This included, among others, every form of Deoxys. The metagame was chaotic to say the least. There were so many absurdly broken things running around that it was difficult to figure out where to start. Not many people actually used Deoxys Normal because it was just outclassed by Deoxys Attack. But if it had been allowed to remain in the tier after DOA's inevitable ban, it would have just done the same thing. So the player base saved themselves some time and banned it immediately. DON thus earned the unique distinction combination of being temporarily OU and being too good for the tier, despite not seeing any use. So that was something to tide it over as it returned to its advanced status of seeing no usage in Ubers. It couldn't reprise its anti-Deoxys speed niche, as the old extreme speed DOS set from Generation 4 had completely died out. Predictably, Deoxys attack tore through OU like butter. It outsped the Shaman Sky and Darkrai that everyone else was fawning over, and was just about impossible to switch into. Even the popular bulky Jirachi on rain teams didn't enjoy eating Life Orb Thunders or superpowers. Switching it in was easier than ever before, since Generation 5 not only gained excellent new U-turn Pokemon, but also added Volt Switch. Shocking as it may seem, Deoxys attack was instantly banned from OU, and went on to shine in Ubers once again. The addition of Team Preview actually improved it in its role as a Focus Sash lead, whether it was using 4 attacks or 3 attacks with spikes. Now, if it saw the opponent was packing something that would ruin it like Tyranitar, it could simply not lead off, or it could lead off and make a more informed decision on which move needed to be made with regards to spiking versus attacking. For instance, superpowering the Tyranitar down to the Sash to give its teammate Groudon or Kyogre an almost guaranteed win in the Weather War. Having information on the opposing team helped players get the most out of DOA, who was already amazingly consistent. It didn't have to play guessing games as a result of only being able to run 4 moves anymore. It was a fixture on hyper offense styles. Beyond the land of leadoffs and Focus Sashes, Mewtwo had gained everyone's attention upon receiving Psy Strike, and thus DOA's Life Orb set was once again somewhat of an underrated gem, because it was uncommon relative to how devastating it could be. It was easier to provide switch-ins for it than ever before, thanks to pivoting teammates like Volt Switch Zekrom and come Black and White 2, the new king of the tier, Scarf Genesect. Plus, one of Mewtwo's advantages over DOA, Self-Destruct, was no longer relevant as a result of the move's power nerf. Of course, Mewtwo still possessed the significant advantage of Fire Blast, but if it really needed, DOA could run Hidden Power Fire to great effect, and it had its own huge advantages Mewtwo would do anything for. In addition to superpower slamming Dialga, DOA's absurdly powerful Psycho Boost absolutely destroyed Ghost Arceus, with a good chance to cleanly KO it after Stealth Rock, while absolutely destroying Genesect thinking they could pivot in. If it didn't outright KO Genesect, it could seal the deal with another advantage of DOA's Extreme Speed, a move that also possessed great utility in finishing off weakened Extreme Killer Arceus. DOA's huge special attack advantage over Mewtwo was also huge in helping it blast through other popular bulky Pokemon like Ho-Oh, Lugia, Latias, and Giratina. Overall, Generation 5 Deoxys attack was basically an enhanced version of its role in the previous generation. Team Preview helped it to be a better Sash lead, and new pivot moves helped its Life Orb set wreak havoc as much as possible. If you can believe it, Deoxys defense did not start the 5th generation in OU, because it was too busy dropping to UU. As comical as this may seem, and it really was absurd, it wasn't quite as outrageous as it sounds, at least at first. Power creep was so excessive that nobody was really thinking about DLD, while Kyurem, Staraptor, and Sunfield Victini were in the tier. Even after the most immediately broken things left the tier, it took a while for DLD to really catch on. Everybody knew it was good, that much was obvious, and there was little more irritating than an Eviolite Chansey backed by Deoxys defense. And if that sounds obnoxious, A, it's because it was, and B, just imagine having to play against it. However, it wasn't overshadowing the dominant strategies that rose in usage after the early stages of UU, such as Stoutland Sand. It would take some time, but it eventually turned out that it was not as evolved that DLD was at its best. Only once it began to see usage as an aggressive hazard stacker on offensive teams did the player base realize that one of the most dangerous Pokemon in the tier had been under their noses all this time. In other words, Deoxys defense wasn't as good as Deoxys defense offense. It was so effective because it was still massively bulky even with just maximum HP investment, and when it maxed its speed, it became unfairly easy for DLD to stack its own hazards while preventing the opponents. Answering it, or at least answering it reliably, was nearly impossible. Rapid spinning away the hazards wasn't an answer for multiple reasons. First, there were several excellent offensive ghosts available. Second, even if the ghosts themselves fell to the rapid spinner, they'd have denied the spinner so hard that it would be easy to finish it off with a teammate before spin could be used. For example, Chandelure wasn't perfect against Blastoise, but it could tank a Scald and slam it with Energy Ball, easily leaving the slow Blastoise in range to be KO'd by everything else on Chandelure's team. Third, DLD could choose to destroy most spinners itself between Rocky Helmet and Nightshade. Attempts to spin on DLD would be punished incredibly hard in just one turn, let alone the complete futility of a prolonged attempt. It was nearly impossible to stop DLD from setting up to begin with. Either faster taunts didn't really exist, and DLD could even run the newly buffed Magic Coat or Mental Herb if it wanted to bypass them, though its main use was getting the 1-up on opposing fast DLD in what would otherwise be a speed tie. Thus, most of the time, DLD would stack its hazards uncontested, and the spinners would take hazard damage as they switched into DLD's offensive teammates, making it even more impossible for them to actually get the spin off. With multiple hazards so easily stacked, several several of Yu Yu's most dangerous offensive threats became ridiculously hard to switch into, especially in conjunction with one another. Some players wanted Spike's ban as a whole, since Roserade was another one of Yu Yu's most dominant Pokemon that consistently made his teammates ridiculously dangerous. However, the player base eventually decided that Deoxys defense was the culprit, and chose to take action against it instead. Roserade remains a piece of Generation 5 Yu Yu to this day, while DLD, though it took longer than one would expect from a Deoxys form that somehow wound up in Yu Yu, was finally banned. Deoxys defense didn't take long to go from BL to a genuine OU Pokemon, as it had already established itself as the new face of the hyper offense playstyles immediately in the wake of Deoxys Speed's ban in Black and White 1. The same max HP, max speed dual hazard set from Yu Yu was similarly incredible in the tier above, starting the game with momentum and effectively powering up OU's most dangerous sweepers like Dragonite and Terrakion even more. It also didn't take long for the complaints about DLD to start rolling in. Its ease and nigh unstoppable hazard stacking